Hey, listen, we have to welcome to the show. We have to. How rude is it? We want to welcome to the show, and we want to apologise to Dr. Jeremy Walker because we kept him waiting far too long. But Dr. Jeremy Walker joins us. Good evening to you, sir.
Hey, how you doing?
Yeah,
Nice to
doing
see
pretty
everybody.
good.
Nice to be back.
From the University of Technology, Sydney. So, what are you now? About 10 past 8 p.m. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah, that's right.
And
Just after eight.
it's like a cold Sydney day at 35 degrees or some crap like that.
Yeah, we've got the heat wave, which I think is important. Could be an entree to the way I'd come into this topic because, yeah, I mean, it's very interesting to see because we spoke a few months back, and it's just to me really interesting to see that we have people in the parliament, that the haka that went around the world. Um, Debbie talking straight up that this is about the Atlas Network and this is not about race, right? And Jack Tame didn't pick that up and didn't follow through and ask for any detail on that. But I think this is really, really important that we have a look at what that means. So thanks
Yeah,
for
yeah.
inviting me
So
on.
that's all right. So the very first question is it's words. I'm echoing words that Debbie said when she talked about the Atlas agenda. What is the Atlas agenda, and how does it relate to what we're seeing in New Zealand?
Well, I mean, it's been going, it's a big agenda, right? Because this network has been being built out from the 1970s, really, in a counter reaction of large corporations and extremely wealthy individuals, particularly in the fossil fuel sector, who really wanted to push back against democracy, against popular movements like the anti-war movements, like the environmental movement, like in the States, you had the American Indian movement, you had the kind of black liberation, here in Australia, you had land rights. And so there's all of these kind of, there's too much democracy going on. And so they start to figure out they need to change public opinion and push back in this really muscular way. And that's been the Atlas Network was formed in 1981 to mass produce these free market think tanks with hidden donors, or I'd rather call them investors, because they were building a deliberate infrastructure. They were building something very definite. But the point is to hide from people who is really behind it, and also
Right.
to hide from people the fact that they're all connected. They have some kind of fundamental connectivity, which is that the directors all meet once a year, or in regional forums, and they're trained by the same people and vetted by the same people. So you've got David Seymour has his Atlas Network MBA from 2008, which is, I don't know if it's a real qualification or not, but that's kind of like, we've vetted you, we've done all the psychological profiling, you can go out there and we can see you can do media, you can run these campaigns, we've trained you how to do it, because he spent, 2008 to 2013 in the Canadian branch of the Atlas Network. And I think that we really should be asking a lot of questions about that. So there's more than 500 of these organizations comprising the total network in 100 countries. Around 200 are in the States, where all the original money came from. That's where the big strength is. About 170 in Latin America, which was built out in the Reagan era to kind of domesticate the popular left-wing movements in Latin America. After the kind of dictatorships that were fostered to repress all of this, popular movements from below in Chile and Argentina, for example, which is where they first tried out their radical programs of privatization and deregulation. Also, mass confiscations of indigenous land, of course, in Chile, and handing that out to the generals and the mates and so on. And that's where they first got started. And then, it's kind of branched out to, there's now more than 500 of them. So you've got two in New Zealand, and it's really important to look at this in the context not only of Seymour's background, but also what the New Zealand Initiative and the Taxpayers Union are. Who are they? What are they doing? And how are they participating in this whole debate? Now, since I was last speaking to you, we've seen their program actually emerge, and we've seen, attempts to overturn claims that we need to overturn seabed and seashore rights. So what I would say, and we need to have an LNG terminal now. We're going to set fast track legislation to smash through all of these mining projects. You've got offshore wind being, cancelled so they can, because of seabed claims that they're now advancing. You've got overturning the previous government's ban on, oil and gas exploration, because we're in this absolutely disastrous climate emergency. And so the real thing here is, like, what Seymour is doing is exactly the same thing that they did in Australia. And to me, it's really galling to see all those comments about that he makes about, oh, Australia divides people by race. Like Australia we tried to get there was a referendum long overdue just for recognition, right?
Is it The
Of,
Voice?
of that Aboriginal people exist and have
Yeah.
existed. Yeah, the voice referendum, and that would have given people a voice to the parliament, but not seats in the parliament, which is what Murray have already. And it wouldn't have set up any additional things. It was a very, 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 very modest proposal compared to what, what you have and what is admirable and what is admired about the settlement, the plurinational, pluri-sovereign settlement of the Constitution. So they're coming at the Constitution not because of race and equality. This is the story they want to tell you. And this is exactly the slogan they used here over and over again. It will divide us by race, divide us by race, divide
Yeah.
us by race. No one wants to
Can
talk
we
about
also,
race.
hey, just a question, Jeremy?
Yeah, yeah.
Can we, if you can, contextualize it to what you're seeing, like you're doing now, seeing in New Zealand, and
Yeah.
seeing what benefits the Atlas Network by a group, I'll say allegedly funding things like what David Seymour is doing, to then it feels like kind of put the knee on the neck of Māori and New Zealand or Indigenous people. What benefit do they see from it, and why would they be doing that in New Zealand?
Well, they'll be doing it for exactly the same reasons that, I mean, if you look at what was, let's look at where David Seymour was trained, right? He was trained, he went over and did this course in 2008 with Brad Lipps, the CEO, probably over at George Mason University. And, that is well known for being funded by the Koch brothers' oil refining billions, right? And the mainstay of the Koch brothers' fortune, they ploughed in, since the early 70s, into building up this network and refining their tactics and building all this infrastructure, training people and pumping out publications and just flooding every corner of it, and just systematically knocking out the things that the ordinary people have to resist being dominated by billionaires and giant corporations. So they're kind of, so if you look at where he comes from, it's a frontier center in Canada. Now, they have, I put a few links in the chat. They've, we've been, I've been looking at their climate denial stuff. They've published thousands over the last 20 years, thousands of things saying that climate change isn't real, or that climate policy will wreck the economy, or that solar panels don't work at nighttime, all of this stuff. Now, who would be literally, they're in the thousands. One of the most productive anti-climate policy and anti-climate science of all of the 500 Atlas think tanks. Not all of them do it. About half of them do climate denial and obstruction. But and then they also have this whole thing I just put out there, put to you in the chat there about how the anarcho-indigenous ideology of extreme protesters, like that is indigenous people wanting to block new oil pipelines on their land, is it's terrorism. They're going to ruin the state, and these hippies that are trying to arguing that we shouldn't have more coal and gas in an absolute disaster where we're already off the cliff, that they should all be locked up and they should be treated as terrorists. So they've got this whole, it's a very specifically trying to take away the rights of Indigenous people in Canada, and then denying their historical legacy and their land rights, right? So the same thing. That's basically what it's really about. The Constitution.
So let's have a look. You've mentioned a couple of things. You've mentioned a couple of things. So specifically in New Zealand, 25th of October this year. So what's that? A month ago. Wind power firm departs amid fast track controversy over seabed mining. So literally getting rid of what you're talking about, and literally opening up, stuff within the ocean, stuff within the seas. Chewy, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, this is the consistent thing, and I think why Atlas has targeted Indigenous people, because they're often the core environmental protest group, right? They don't want their land wrecked by oil pipelines or strip mines and all of that sort of thing. So I think when it comes to a document like Te Tiriti guaranteeing Māori a say at what happens to their lands and their fisheries, that is an existential threat for a group like Atlas, and especially for the supporters of that group, because that is something that can give personhood to a river. Then what else can they do? Are we going to have covenants over the West Coast for strip mining and that sort of thing? So this
This is
seems to be a
precisely what
thing.
it's
Like
about.
Atlas has had a linchpin in the New Zealand initiative. They were involved right from day dot. So New Zealand has a really important part in this group. They know the treaty, they know the movements here, and they have exported that knowledge to other colonized countries for the benefit of mining groups, especially.
Jeremy?
Yeah, well, look, I mean, if you look at, so yeah, I mean, so that's what Simon was doing when he was learning how to be political, how to go out in front of the cameras, how to say the same thing over and over again to make, like, which is what they do here: divide by race, divide by race, divide. Now, what that does is put into your head the idea that this is about race and it's about division. Now, what is the opposite of that? Unite by race? Like, are we all going to be one white nation again? Like, what? I mean, but that's what they're doing. What is the opposite of divide? What do they want? They want us to be united by race, or unite the white race against the brown race that's got too many rights. Like, that's what I think really is the subtext there, and the thing is that the Constitution, we often they want to talk about equality of individual rights in the Constitution, but fundamentally what constitutions do, even if they don't say it so explicitly, but the Article 2 of the Waitangi Treaty does say this, it demarcates land. Who has rights to land, who doesn't, what can happen on what land. And that is what the Voice was all about here, right? It was all about that. The think tanks here that set up the New Zealand Atlas in the 80s. So the No campaign came out of those think tanks, which is the Centre for Independent Studies. Alan Gibbs was on the board of that in the mid 80s when they set it up, the Atlas in New Zealand, and the guy who instigated it, one of the most important instigators, was a guy called John Bonathan, who founded the giant gas corporation Santos, which has all kinds of ongoing court battles with First Nations people in Australia. They really don't want to have a voice in Parliament, bringing that up in Parliament and then bringing it up in the press. So that, and it was even said so. Anthony Mundine, who was one of the faces, Indigenous man who has spent 10 years or more working within the Australian branch of the Atlas for them, he literally said it on the website. You can still see it now on the Centre for Independent Studies website. He said the problem with the Voice of Parliament will be that you'll have all these people saying stuff which will slow down, not stop, slow down the approval of giant coal and gas projects. He literally said what it was about. And but then everyone was like, oh, it's about race, and are we equal or are we not? We'll wreck the Constitution. But that's really fundamentally what's at stake here, because New Zealand is seen internationally as a real beacon of how you can actually have a plurinational, post-colonial, pluri-sovereign, bilingual settlement, a constitutional settlement. So they're going after your constitution. Just in the same way that in the States, you've seen now the Federalist Society, which is yet another affiliate of the Atlas Network, right? The Federalist Society was set up precisely to completely reinterpret the ordinary understanding of justice, right? So these billionaires would fund these training programs for judges where they'll be feted in fancy hotels, and they'll say, no, you got to think about the economic interpretation of law. It's about property rights and, the free market and stuff. And now you've got a situation where the Supreme Court in the States is just saying, oh, the president is outside the law. The president can do what he wants, can't commit a crime. That's the Federalist Society. All those nominees that have stacked it are coming from that tradition as well. So it's really important. They want to take away the ability of ordinary people to challenge giant fossil fuel industries right at the time when we need to shut them down. And I think that's what this is really about.
Hey, two last questions. I'm just going to mute you while I'm talking, just because people are saying they're getting an echo, so that will stop it. I'll unmute you when I finish asking my questions. The first question is, what's in it for David Seymour? And the second question is, what can we, not like me and Chewie, but we the people, do about this incursion by Atlas into our communities? And you're back on now.
Well, I really don't know what's in it for Seymour. I really fail to understand what motivates these people. I mean,
money? Is it just that? Is it no more? Is it just money?
Oh no, it's power. It's the feeling of having the most dangerous, richest, most powerful people in the world backing you up, right? These people are used to winning. They nearly always win. And in fact, what's really important, and I would really stress this to everyone in our row, is that New Zealand is the first place in the world where people are saying the Atlas Network is doing this to us. That's never happened before. It's hardly even happened that people have like looked back and said, "Oh, the Atlas Network did that," because here we had a carbon tax policy and renewable energy policy under a Labor government, 2009 to 2013, and the Murdoch press ran this massive campaign about the carbon tax was going to ruin everything, and that was run through the Institute of Public Affairs. They put out 1,000, like hundreds of media things, and it was all amplified. And then they rolled the government, and then the next government came in and abolished that, right? So it was driven, and the Atlas website still says, "Oh, we nominated them for a prize for this." And if you can go to the Atlas website as well, they wanted to nominate for a prize another Canadian one called MacDonald Laurier, because they had this huge campaign against ratification of the UN UNDRIP, the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, precisely because it might give First Nations people more leverage to stop unwanted oil and gas projects. That's why they did it. And so what I would say to New Zealanders is that you want to have a look at, you really want to focus on what NZI and Taxpayers Union are doing, right? So if I look at, you have in New Zealand Initiative, you have the chairman of the board, last time I looked, was a guy called Roger Partridge, who runs the Bell Gully law firm. Now they are on the petroleum industry lobby, the Energy Aotearoa. And if you have a look at who else is on there, it's there's the Australian one, the Australian APIA, which is where you'll find the really big ones like Shell, BP, Chevron, Conoco, all the giant American oil companies, and that's what it's about, right? You look at the other people on the board. Now they don't tell you who pays for them. You can kind of guess by their board crossovers. So you've got on the NZI, you've got the Bell Gully law firm, which designed the carbon market, the trading market that you have, but it had no cap. So you could trade these certificates, but there was no limit, right? So it didn't actually affect the fossil fuel industry at all. So that's why they like it. You've got consultancies like Charles River Associates, which are well known in my academic area for every time there's an election, they'll put out an independent economics report saying, the climate policy of the progressive or the centre left party will destroy the economy and there'll be mass unemployment. They put out these hit pieces before elections. You've got banks, ANZ, Deutsche Bank. These are all huge fossil investors, Origin Energy. And then I look at what's happening.
Can I just bring us back?
Yeah,
sorry. Just the last thing is, what can we do?
Well, I guess what you can do is, I think what Te Pāti Māori, what Debbie said on that interview, is actually look at who is benefiting from this. It's not about race and equality at all. The whole point of that slogan is to get us talking about race and whether we're equal or not. No, it's about land rights and who gets to decide whether or not giant foreign corporations can destroy your land or not. That's fundamentally what it's about. So I will be looking very carefully at what the NZI is doing and who are those people and what are they doing. I'll be looking at the cases around Mike Smith's case that's coming up in the court. What is Seymour saying about that? What is the Act saying about it? What is our best mate Jordan? So I would be really, really looking at that. I would be encouraging everybody in New Zealand to be looking at precisely those links to.
All right. Before we wrap up, Chewy, is there anything else you want to get in before we say goodbye to Jeremy?
I think it's important to realise that this guy is not the mastermind. He is just the messenger.
That's correct. Yeah. That's right.
So
he's there to do a job for someone else, but you don't know who we don't know who that is. Well, we can, if you follow the Atlas, you'll find out who it is. But like Debbie Gibbs, for example, you can see her on the Atlas webpage talking about. She's the chair of the board, so she's sitting on top of these people who not through the Atlas own accounts, but through backdoor deals. They're like handling millions and millions and millions of dollars for this kind of disinformation, state capture, to knock down laws they don't like, to swing elections, to smear people. So and one of the things on the site she talks about, she met the legendary George Pearson. He's the guy who was running the Koch brothers' massive oil-derived political slush fund, which has built the Atlas. It's one of the major funds of many very large billionaire funds, but probably the major one that's built the Atlas over time. So there's a direct line there to some of the richest private billionaires in the US that have brought about the possibility of the Trump phenomenon in the US. And that's really what we should be careful about.
And I guess what we can do, Jeremy, is keep talking about it. Hey, look, thank you
Keep
so much for
talking
joining
about
us tonight.
Thank you.
We
Welcome.
appreciate you giving us some time.
I'm really proud of everybody over there. And I watched the Hikoya, I saw Hana's haka. I was just like, so good to see.
it's good,
Keep
right?
it up.
Yep.
Keep it up.
All right.
Stick together, back each other up, and keep on. Thank you. Thanks for
Dr.
having
Jeremy
me.
Walker, thanks for joining us.
Thank you.
Bye.
All right, there we go. So, gosh, there's so much information that we need to figure out and find out from. Anything you want to say just to wrap that all up, Chewy? Anything?
I
from
forgot to start the comment, but I'm just gonna paraphrase. Sometimes it can be difficult when we spent so long pushing back against conspiracy theories, right? These shadowy global organizations, World Economic Forum, whatever, and then talk about something like Atlas. You can find these documents, you can find these pictures, and when I started reading about Atlas and going back and seeing that some of its major roots are with New Zealanders, the Gibbs family, and all of that sort of thing, and just and just seeing that these people all started this stuff in the late 80s when people were making mad money, but that was also the start of the environmental movements. You saw Indigenous rights coming more to the forefront in New Zealand around that time as well. You saw an utter dismantling of the New Zealand system to build neoliberalism, and those same people were involved in that as well. It's the links are so clear and so obvious, and every time I see something from the Taxpayers Union, I'm reminded of how much these guys have got their fucking thumb on the scale. They'll talk about democracy, they'll talk about the marketplace of ideas, but they're trying to own all the storefronts. They're trying to shape the discussion that the rest of us are having.
Yeah.
It's not fair. It is money. And if you've just got to make one choice when it comes to talking about the principles of the treaty and that sort of thing, that intersection between who you're going to stand with, international mining giants, or the Indigenous people of New Zealand trying to protect rivers and trying to keep these guys from strip mining conservation estates and that sort of thing. Make your choice. This is literally the old guard trying to maintain their stack of money and trying to fool us into thinking that there is no way that we can transition into a glorious future. That the only way to keep doing things is to do things the way that we always have, because that's working out all right. Don't you have a great big TV, and aren't you thankful for that? We are crashing through some really serious red lines in terms of climate change, because these guys don't want to change. They don't see the value in transitioning to new energy development or anything like that, because they're so heavily invested in the old ways.
Yeah.
So this comes to the crux of what I have been saying lately. What is good for Māori is good for all of us. That's the end game, to keep these fuckers out. David Seymour is the herald, and I think they have chosen poorly, because I wouldn't follow that man out of a burning building.
I think you saw that tonight as well with Jack Tame. Like, it's like 5 parts brilliant, 5 parts terrible, that Jack Tame pushed back on so many things. And maybe when he was on, I think he was on Te Ao with Moana, or Mihi Narangi Forbes did a bit with him. But really, other than those 2 or 3 things, have we heard anyone else in the media push back in that kind of way? So it was a great watch, and it was a great interview. But it feels like to me, when I said I think he was weak in that interview, Seymour, it feels to me that because it's like he'd never thought he'd have to answer these questions. I think it was
I
Mahina
have a
Rangi Forms who asked about Atlas, and he went, here we go. Remember that interview? It might have been Moana. I'm not sure which one, but it just ends up being someone who has the arrogance to go, no one's going to question me. That's kind of how, or who's not smart enough to know that people are going to question him. That's how it kind of comes across.
So I have a couple of thoughts on this. First thought is he's a man in an echo chamber.
Yep.
He doesn't, as much as he talks about debate, he doesn't engage with debate. He will go on places like the platform. He'll make some comments on Facebook, that sort of thing. But he isn't thrown into something like Jack Tame is a phenomenal interviewer. As much as we sometimes criticize him, if there's one interviewer in New Zealand that you have to go into correct with your shit squared away, it's a Jack Tame interview. That's why Luxon doesn't do that.
Yeah.
And I think Gray here in the chat pointed out David's tell is that he blinks a lot, and that's because he is a lizard man, and that's how they get oxygen. It's actually through the eyes and not through the mouth. So watch for that.
Speaking of, thank you for the super chat, Worming. While Seymour is pushing his bill, New Zealand Initiative calls to reign in the Supreme Court. Reference a looming constitutional. Yeah, I saw that. It was on their front page. Yeah, hang on.
Yes, clear and present danger. The New Zealand Supreme Court.
Here we go. A looming constitutional crisis. Who started that crisis? Yeah, this is the other thing, and we've been talking about this a lot. You know, people are talking about like the Seymours of this world are talking about all the division. It's like, well, if there is, it's either been it's because of you, or at the very least, you've added jet fuel to it by doing these things. It's like we've told you this for a long time, Whānau. You know what the right does in general is they'll sit in opposition and they'll go, oh, government's too big, government's broken, government can't work, private sector does it better, government's terrible at it. And then they get elected. And then what they do, think about all the cuts, think about the lack of spending, think of the tax breaks, think of the landlords, is they actively break government. So they become a self-fulfilling prophecy. And then they step back and point and they go, see, we told you government didn't work, but we've got these guys back here who have got an LTD at the end of their business name, limited liability company, and they're going to come and fix the problem for you. So they are a self-fulfilling prophecy. And that's why when you hear the stories about, you know, the conservative part of politics being good for the economy, there was a letter dropped last week by 15 economists saying, start spending. The Treasury saying, stop, you know, that famous left-wing mouthpiece, the Treasury, saying, stop all the cuts, because they've sold the narrative, because they want to watch the pennies, so they say, and they've sold the narrative that they're good with politics. When were all the last surpluses? Not on the national, it's fucking Cullen Fund, mate.
Oh,
that was when all the surpluses were. What about old Auntie Jacinda, who got us through a crisis, keeping 20,000 New Zealanders alive, as the record said, and better than most. Yeah, there was a hard landing, but we got through it better than most countries. And so I'm over this. The right's better at the economy when they're clearly not, because what you should be doing in a recession type economy is spending, and they're cutting, which is going to worsen the economy, and it's going to make all our tradies and nurses and police leave these shores. And then when the economy is better, there's going to be no one here to fix it up. So it's frustrating, Chewy.
So you talk about surplus and that sort of thing. Where is it? Sorry, I just had to scramble to find it. Associate. So this is from when? 21st of November. Associate Finance Minister Chris Bishop is tempering expectations around the government's ability to return its books to surplus by 2027-28. And this is a direct quote. We are not going to be a slave to a surplus, he told the Herald when asked to comment on the Treasury warning about the economy. So there you go. Remember, they campaigned on being the safe financial set of hands. They're the party of business, party of numbers. They're the ones that are going to get all of this excess spending under control. And we have seen a series of public service cuts like we have never seen before. These guys threw a fucking boat anchor into the machinery of this country to cut costs. And now they're saying there might not be a benefit to this. Sorry.
Just remember as well, yeah, and I know you can't compare it to a household budget, but if you had a household budget and you wanted to save for something, right? So you wanted to save, that's called a surplus. So you've got leftover at the end of the day. You decide to stop spending in various areas to save that money, right? So you need to have more money left over after you pay your bills. This government saying we're not going to have more money left over, right, after we pay all our bills, as they give away $17 billion in tax cuts and landlord reimbursements. So they've taken $17 billion out of their pile of money, and now they don't have extra money to put into a surplus. Can anyone see what we're saying here? They've taken away a huge lump of their consolidated fund, and they've gone, phew. And now they're saying we're not going to get back into surplus, which is by definition requires the government to have more money than they spend as they give away money in tax breaks and landlord reimbursements.
Yep. Like we have said on the show before, the government's job is to spend money when times are tough to stimulate the economy. They take their foot off the gas when times are good. We expect them to do that. This is the time that they should be doing big projects, big
100%.
state-owned solar or wind farms.
Yep.
The double tracking and electrification of our entire rail network.
Tunnels under Wellington. Oh no, we'll leave that one. We'll leave that one. Not that one.
Those sort of projects. You can see that historically. The countries that did well out of the Depression did great, big social benefit programs, whether it's building houses or highways or autobahns. Sorry, Mustache Man got that one right, unfortunately. Those things help those countries claw themselves out of a depression, also into a global war. But we'll brush over that. That was also very, very good for the economy for a select group of people around the world. So yeah, those are the things. We built dams, we built power stations and refineries, almost bankrupted the country, but they provided infrastructure that we still use to this day, near 50 years later. So maybe that was actually a good decision. But that pushing the country into near bankruptcy to do it set the stage for the same fucking people we're talking about that set up Atlas to sell off everything that taxpayers built and owned.
Yeah.
Everything is fucking linked. Everything is together. And I feel now like Charlie Day pointing at the pegboard with the red strings everywhere. So there is a danger in that.